Today's podcast is brought to you by the Save Movement. The Save Movement is an international animal rights group that started in 2010 in Toronto with Toronto Pig Save and now has over 220 groups worldwide. Please visit thesavemovement.org to learn about the many ways you can support the Save Movement. And now on to today's show.
Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 222, Compassion Over Killing, with Undercover Investigator Scott David.
In today's episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talked to Scott David, a retired undercover investigator for Compassion Over Killing. That's right, Scott's like a real-life livestock James Bond. We discussed the whole process of how he actually went undercover to what he did and saw while under employment in various slaughterhouses around the country. Scott also shares how he used the footage to exploit the cruel practices that he witnessed.
Scott began cutting animal products out of his diet in 2010. After getting his master's degree in Applied Ecology, he joined an after-school education program where he taught students about animals and the environment. He then worked for 2 years as an undercover investigator for Compassion Over Killing. During this time, he conducted investigations in 3 different slaughterhouses: Mountaire Farms in North Carolina, Quality Pork Processors in Minnesota, and Superior Farms in California. Now retired from the field, Scott spends his time offering support to Compassion Over Killing's current investigators.
I want to know if you're still struggling with any aspects of inflammation. If you are, you know that it takes you so long to get up in the morning to start your day. The pain and stiffness in your hands and knees from turning the pages in your child's bedtime story is just unbearable. You feel like you can't be the parent that you want to be. The list is pretty endless, but for those of you who decided that today is your day to take action and start seeing success, you know that you need to start a completely plant-based diet today, and you might need help doing it. By getting support, you know that you don't have to spend hours of research deciding what to do. All you need to do is send us an email at info@planttrainers.com and you'll get something really powerful in return. You'll get our support and our friendship. Just in case you were thinking, but Shoshana, how can you help me? I could see everyone else doing it, but I just can't seem to get the pieces right together. It's just me. Then you know that you need to absolutely email us. Like Alyssa, who used to cry that she couldn't get her hands to work properly to make her children's lunches to take her to school. Then we made the smallest changes in her diet, and now she's creating excited lunches for her kids daily. Or Jessica, whose pain and stiffness was just too much to handle in the morning. She would often stay in bed. Now she gets out of bed with much more ease to take care of her 6 children. So if that's you, stuck, frustrated, and feeling like you're just going to have to live with the symptoms of severe inflammation, hit us up with an email at info@planttrainers.com right now and tell us your biggest struggle, and we will get in touch with you and talk to you about it.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
I'm so grateful that this weekend we were able to sponsor and be a part of the Wizard of Oz Halloween charity event benefiting the storybook monkeys that was put on by Universe of Ali and Vegan Social Events and Love Wild, Live Free. There were so many great volunteers there, so many compassionate and talented people, and I was just very grateful to be a part of that with them.
I'm grateful for the same thing. I mean, it was just such a great opportunity to meet some incredible people and interact with them and connect. And it was all for such a great cause to help the monkeys.
Scott David, thank you so much for being on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share with us and our listeners before we begin?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So honestly, I just feel extremely grateful to be able to continue working with Compassion Over Killing, even though I'm not actually doing undercover work anymore. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but I wasn't very eager to go job hunting after I stopped working in the field. I was really worried about whether or not I could get another job helping animals. So I'm just super happy that they were willing to keep me on board. And I guess on a smaller scale, like just grateful there are restaurants with vegan pizza and burritos close to me.
I think there's a lot of people out there saying, I agree with you, and a lot of people saying, damn, I wish I was you. Yeah, the vegan burrito goes a long way.
So, like I
Yeah, yeah.
mentioned, yeah, so like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, this is a topic that we haven't really covered on our podcast before, and it's actually making me a little bit nervous, which I think is probably a reason why we should be talking about this, because it's something that most people shy away from. And you're about to open up my world and probably a lot of our listeners' world. So before we get deeper into it, we mentioned compassion over killing. Maybe you could just explain to our listeners and to us what that's all about.
Right. So Compassion Over Killing is a national animal protection organization. So we do try and focus on cruelty to animals in agriculture, and we also promote plant-based eating as a way to, build a kinder world for everyone, humans and animals.
And you use the term plant-based over vegan
Right.
diet?
We do it just, it's makes it a little bit more accessible for people. A lot of times they react sort of badly to, things like vegan. You know,
And is this a not-for-profit organization? Who pays the salaries?
it is nonprofit, so all the money we have to do our investigations, our campaigns, all that just comes from donors, pretty much.
Do you have any campaigns or any events or anything like that that go on, or is it just a basic donation kind of thing?
We do have a lot of different campaigns. We try and go around, like where I met you guys, to Veg Fest and try and fundraise there. We also have benefits at restaurants, things like that. We actually run our own Veg Fest, DC Veg Fest. Since most of us are in the DC area, so we try and drum up a lot of support that way. We have end of the year parties, things like that. Pretty much anything we can do, I guess.
So let's backtrack a little bit. How did you get into this industry in the first place?
Well, for me, I used to be more interested in helping wild animals, specifically reptiles. When growing up, I was really into like dinosaurs and stuff like that. And then I got into living reptiles, crocodiles, and lizards, snakes. And I really wanted to help conservation efforts, things like that, to help those animals. But I started to realize that it really wasn't morally consistent of me to want to save animals out in the wild while I was still, eating farmed animals. And my sister, she actually ended up giving up meat first. And after I took that step and I followed her example, I just sort of fell deeper into the rabbit hole, so to speak, and I ended up changing what I wanted to do for a living.
What does one do when they decide, okay, I want to start to protect the animals? How do you look for jobs? How do you fall into this undercover investigation? No, I don't think children grow up saying, I want to be an undercover investigation for farming animals. Maybe they want to be
A private
James Bond.
investigator or a police officer or something
Yeah.
like that.
Sure. It's definitely not as glamorous as something like James Bond or something like that. I don't really go to any fancy parties or dress up in a suit and tie all the time. But I pretty much got into it like you would any other position. I saw a job posting online, job hunting website. I applied. I was pretty much at the time looking for any sort of position that I could get to help animals. This is just something I came across, and I thought, even though it's hard and the job posting says it's going to be hard, says it's going to be pretty much the hardest thing I'll ever do, I figured it was something I could at least try and apply for. Who knows? Maybe I could do a good job at it. That's pretty much how I did it.
So let me understand this job. And if we talk about things that you're not allowed to talk about, just let us know. So basically, they strapped the camera on you and you went into these farms and you were working as an actual employee of the farm, and they didn't know about it, and you had the responsibility or the roles of doing the job that their actual workers are doing. And what did you have to do in those farms?
Right. So you pretty much take the jobs that they give you. You do anything they ask of you there. For the most part, it's just fast-paced, manual labor type stuff, especially for slaughterhouses. Speed is pretty much everything there. You'll get into a lot of jobs with really just repetitive motions. So you'll do the same few actions like hundreds, thousands of times per day. You could be doing things like making the same cut in a slab of meat all day, or you could be just lifting boxes. You could be flipping carcasses over, which, leads to a lot of injuries in workers. They get stuff like carpal tunnel, back problems. People's hands would freeze up and be unable to open, things like that. For me, I worked like 5 different positions, I think, at the slaughterhouses I was at.
So, okay, I want to back it up even more. I feel like we're completely going out of order. So you find a job posting for a slaughterhouse, and what does that job posting look like? Do people understand, do you think, what they're getting into when they get into it?
I think for the most part, no. I mean, a lot of the job postings are really just for, general labor, or they'll say something like, we need people for the production line, things like that. And for the people that they actually hire, I mean, a lot of them are, low-skilled, unexperienced, or, they're immigrant workers, so they don't speak English that well or something like that. So they are pretty much looking for any sort of job that they can get. And these companies, they will hire these people, since these jobs don't require those sorts of skills, and they'll pretty much just work those people to the bone. Things like long hours, physical labor, weekend work, hazardous conditions, right? There's heavy machinery all over the place, things like that. So much so that the turnover rate at some of these places is over like 100% in a year. These people just can't stay in these jobs for that long because of how tough they are. But the actual job postings themselves will normally just say things like production line.
So you'll think that your job is to check the eggs in the basket and make sure that they're not cracked. And then before you know it, you're separating the female chicks from the male chicks and breaking necks.
Could be, yeah, for sure.
And the people who do end up staying longer, is there a certain quality to them that they have? Like that they are desensitized from certain violence already in their life, or they actually enjoy this kind of work? Or is there like a process that you see happening in these workers as time goes on?
I think that for most of them, they're really just, trying to do whatever job they can get, right? They're really just hungry for work. They need to put food on the table, so they do whatever they can in order to make money. I think that the job itself, right, is very stressful and traumatic. And, animals are killed as quickly as possible, and that does lead to some workers becoming desensitized to the violence that those jobs entail. And there's also this pressure from the higher ups at those jobs, and that sort of drives the workers to do basically anything they can to keep the line speeds up, to keep their jobs, right? A lot of it's just the pressure from the company. And also it's just the actions that they're partaking in, right? They have to perform those standard practices, things like castration or debeaking, dehorning, among other things. And if you're doing that every day to these animals without administering any painkillers or anything like that, it sort of makes the other abuses seem more normal or more acceptable, like punching and kicking, stuff like that. It's really very just systemic, I think.
I want to get back to the punching and kicking in a minute, but I mean, we're on Skype now looking at you. Our audience can't see you, but I mean, you're a good-looking guy. Your English skills are great. You're very articulate. Clearly you have skills. So when you go into that interview process, do you play a different role? Are you not a red flag?
I think most investigators always end up playing sort of a different role. I mean, the name of the game is just, fitting in with the other people. So anything we can do, to that end is basically just something we have to practice and, have this persona ready sort of at all times while we're talking to people.
I'd be scared. Like I'm thinking of you walking into one of those factories with a camera strapped to yourself, and like, what if they found you out? Like, what would they have done to you? Weren't you so nervous going in on a daily basis, afraid of what could possibly happen?
I mean, I'm always pretty much scared of being found out. I mean, you're constantly suspicious of the other people that you're working with, and you're always worried about what they're thinking of you. It honestly gets pretty tiring just worrying about it all the time. If I'm being honest, though, most of the workers won't really complain about you as long as you're actually doing your job well. So a lot of it is just, really trying to perform at the level that they expect from you. If you are caught, we have a legal team that's helps out the investigators a lot, just in trying to keep ourselves safe legally, making sure there's nothing these companies can really do in a legal sense for us, to us, I guess, as repercussions of us getting caught. So I'm very grateful that we have their support for that.
Is it in your contract when you first become an employee that you can't bring in any cell phones or recording devices or anything like that?
Depends on place to place, what they say. But I mean, like I said, we have our legal team that, sort of goes over everything that we see at these places, including the documents that we're given. So we, really try and play things by the book, make sure everything we do is legal, and there's nothing they can do to us, basically.
I think we should shift a little bit away from you, Scott, and more into the animals and
Sure.
what you were seeing and what was happening there, and how really society is okay with what's going on, and how most people just turn the blind eye and kind of don't really want to know how their food's getting on their plate. They just want to eat it. I mean, you've probably seen some pretty crazy things, and I know that anyone listening that's watched the documentary Earthlings or some of the other videos that Compassion Over Killing puts up on their website, and I'll link to those few in our show notes, but it's very intense. This is intense stuff to watch. It's very tough to watch, and there's a warning that goes up on all these videos that there's going to be some graphic things. I mean, you saw some graphic things in real time, in real life, and I feel like I'm going to start to tear up now just thinking about the animal perspective of it that most people are trying to avoid.
Right. I mean, pretty much time after time, our investigations, we see, horrific cruelty to the animals. And I think that, being able to see those things, no matter where we go, really shows that animal abuse is, rampant, and it's systemic on farms and in slaughterhouses. If you want to talk like more specifics about what I've seen, I mean, we've seen, animals being hit repeatedly in the face with, rattle paddles, some of them shocked like over 100 times with electrical prods. I've seen, a pig regain sensibility after having his throat cut. So he was hanging upside down and, trying to right himself as he continued to bleed because he had, that huge hole in his neck. I saw lambs, still moving and reacting to having their tails cut off after their throats had been cut. We've seen people throwing chickens around and leaving ones that were still living stuck in piles of dead birds. And we've seen, birds being crushed by cages and tractors so much that, their intestines have fallen out of their bodies. Just a whole bunch of terrible things. And I mean, obviously these companies are trying to do their best to hide this from the general public. They put out ads saying, their meat is humane, things like that. Great cheese comes from happy cows, stuff like that. It's really just a big cover up on their part, I think.
Some of those things that you talked about, I can understand that if you're transporting or keeping, thousands of chickens, that a chicken's going to get crushed by a cage every now and then. Like that in my head kind of makes sense. But if you're saying that throats are being slit, but they are still alive. They're not being killed properly, and that's happening over and over again. And it sounds like that's happening more times than not, or that people are actually, like, there should be no reason to shock a pig 100 times. Like, that's for fun, right? Like, that's not part of them trying to keep their job, or punching an animal in the face. Is that part of them keeping their job, or is that them just playing around and just disrespecting?
I mean, some of them will do things just sort of as a stress relief, right? A lot of the punching and kicking that goes along with that. But a lot of it is just, these workers trying to do things as fast as possible, right? So these companies, right, they want to maximize the amount of product they can put out, and animal welfare is basically just another cost for them, whether it's in time or in money. So a lot of these people, they will take shortcuts, or they'll treat the animals really roughly because they think that it makes the animals go through the line faster, right? It takes a long time to move the downer animals, so people just shove them out of the way. It takes a long time to check them for sensibility after they've been bolt gunned, so sometimes they just drag them away without checking. Really, it's just a lot of pressure from the supervisors that are always yelling at you, telling you to move faster, put more pigs or chickens or cows through whatever the animal is. And that really just, makes the workers want to do whatever they can to keep those animals moving. And they think that, sometimes that takes shocking the animals 100 times, or, hitting them in the face with a rattle paddle. They, basically think it's their job.
The SAVE movement is an international animal rights group that holds vigils bearing witness to animals in front of slaughterhouses. The group started in 2010 in Toronto with Toronto Pig Save, and now has over 220 groups worldwide in 30 countries and 6 continents. The SAVE movement encourages vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters alike to attend vigils and meet the animals. Inspired by Tolstoy, the group believes that we all have the duty to bear witness, not look away, but come to as close as possible to those who are suffering and try to help. Vigils are family friendly. Young and old are invited to come along. If you've seen animals on trucks on the highway and felt sadness and empathy, you're not alone. The SAVE movement encourages you to come to a vigil and join like-minded people. Please visit thesavemovement.org to find vigils in your area for more information on how to start a group. You can support the SAVE movement by following their social media accounts, sharing content, and donating if possible, and we will link to some of those in the show notes. You've completely changed my perspective, because from some of the videos that I've seen, and I don't watch a lot of them, I make sure I know what I need to know, but if I've seen it once, I don't need to watch it 100 times in just different views. But I had this sense that the workers were just animal abusers, like by nature, by being born that way. And it sounds like there's a lot of circumstances that are happening that they're just trying to do the best that they can do, and really there's even more blame to be put on the organizations themselves, or the companies, I should say the companies themselves, to make the workers do what they're doing because of the expectations.
Right. I mean, when people do something like, punch or kick an animal, that, makes for good footage, because it's, very obviously they were, being cruel to it. But, I mean, it is just that pressure, and then just the standard practices themselves, right? The castration or debeaking. Those practices, can be, much crueler than any punch or kick. And they're, completely legal and accepted as a standard practice. So these workers, just end up doing those things, or anything they can, pushing, shoving, pulling on tails, things like that, because, they're really just worried about their jobs.
Is there no standard of practice or protection for the animals that exists?
I mean, on the federal level, right, there is Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, but it's not really well enforced, and it exempts birds from it, who, because they're smaller, they make up well over 90% of the animals that are slaughtered. There's also the Animal Welfare Act, but that doesn't cover farm animals. For the states, they do have animal cruelty laws, but most of them do make exemptions for those actions that are considered standard practice in animal agriculture, right? So you can do things like castrate piglets without anesthesia, or throw baby birds into grinders, and that's totally legal. So I mean, as far as standard practices go, I mean, there's pretty much no protections at all.
I think we just need to start.
It's crazy.
It just shouldn't be. It just shouldn't be happening in the first place. There shouldn't be this opportunity for all of that to happen. And I know this is affecting me very strongly. Do you think a lot of the workers experience PTSD or other kinds of emotional trauma because of what they're doing and seeing on a daily basis?
I mean, I've definitely read about things like that. People getting PTSD from that sort of work, or crime rates rising with slaughterhouse employment, stuff like that. And then, I mean, even for me, I think to a point, I ended up a little desensitized from that kind of violence. I mean, I knew what these people are doing was wrong, but I just ended up not having the same kind of, I guess, visceral reaction from viewing that cruelty that I used to. I think when I was filming in the slaughterhouses, I sort of just became able to think of those issues from like a technical aspect. So it'd be like, oh, how can I best film this, instead of, how can they do something that's this horrible?
It's probably good that you had somewhere else to put your mind in those times.
Yeah, it's definitely something else to focus on, and I think it really did help.
Because if you're desensitized and you're hitting pigs in the face all day, what keeps you from going home and acting that way with your family after a while? Do you think that people change in terms of domestic violence as well?
Not sure about domestic violence in particular, but yeah, I mean, you see a lot of increased crime rates with slaughterhouse employment. So I think it does definitely have some impact. And I mean, these companies, they don't provide the workers with any sort of help for that. So it's something that just sort of creeps up on them, right? They just change slowly without realizing it.
So I'm still finishing to process the fact that you said that there's no standard practices that are actually enforced by the federal government, and that there's animal welfare acts or people that are interested in helping these animals, but there's nothing we could do about it. There's no way to stop this. There's no way to help these animals. There's nothing that can be done. Is that right?
I mean, I wouldn't say that there's nothing you can do, right? I mean, honestly, the simplest way is for people to just choose vegan foods, right? I mean, billions of animals, they suffer on these factory farms and these slaughterhouses, but every time that we sit down to eat, we can make a difference, and we can make these better choices. And if people want to do something like, become an undercover investigator, you can. We're pretty much always looking for people that can help us expose what these companies are doing. On our website, cok.net, under the Get Involved tab, there's information on how to apply for that. Even if you can't be an undercover investigator, which, it's not for everyone, you can still make a difference by, volunteering for animal protection organizations, or, in sanctuaries. Even stuff like, showing off vegan foods for, friends and family. I think all that stuff helps.
Veganize the world. That's what the lady at the vegan bakery said. She's like, we have to take Sundays and Mondays off, or we won't have enough energy to veganize the world.
I've heard stuff.
Right, but then there's all these animals that are still going through these factory farms that are being slaughtered, and we can't save them. And yes, I get it that we could all become vegan, which is a big stretch because that's a very small part of the population right now,
Yeah.
who are eating that way. But yes, I understand that we could do that one person at a time. But if you look at the grand scale, like, that's a huge thing to take on. And how do we, emotionally, that's just a very tough sell. And I mean, people are probably thinking, well, you know what, these pigs or chickens or cows or lambs, they're bred to be food, and so it's not a big deal if we're killing them like that, because they're meant to be eaten.
I remember saying those words myself. That's exactly how I thought. But these animals aren't meant to be domestic. Animals aren't meant to live in pastures. They're just meant to be my food. And now my frame of mind is it's not about saving the animals that are already born. It's about keeping them from even being born in the first place, right? How do we do that? And well, I mean, in both ways, right? Like in both ways, but it's like fixing your illness. Do you take medication, or do you get to the root cause? And the root cause is, if all these animals were not being born, then we wouldn't be dealing with all of these issues also, and we would just be having a decent amount of happy animals living on farms or something. I don't even know. I haven't gone that far in my thoughts yet.
And I'll agree. I mean, it's definitely going to be a long haul. And yeah, the vast majority of people, don't really think of these farm animals as, beings that, should be protected. But I think that that's part of what makes what COK does so important, and the other animal protection organizations. I think that a lot of it is really just awareness and showing the public what goes on behind closed doors, showing them through video, taking them as close as possible to that action, and showing that these animals can feel pain, and they can suffer. They are living beings who experience a lot of the same feelings we do, and I think that hopefully helps them connect to these animals a little bit better, and will hopefully lead to them making better food choices. But it's a long ways in the future where we can veganize, I think, the whole world.
Right. And so when an investigator gets all this footage and this insider information, what actually happens to it? Like you put up a video, but is there ever anyone that takes action on these companies? Is that even allowed? Like, can something be done with the information?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, we do make the short videos for the public for awareness, but just for us, I mean, we also take that evidence of law violations to the authorities to try and get some enforcement of whatever relevant state or federal laws there are. We also end up using a lot of that footage as part of corporate campaigns to try and drum up public outcry against these companies, hopefully trying to get them to change how they do things. I know we recently had an investigation into some Tyson farms where we caught them using what are called nose bones on the male breeder chickens. So they're like little plastic rods, and they're jammed in one nostril and out the other without anesthesia. And that basically makes the birds' heads too wide to fit in all the feeders, right? So the birds are actually bred to become so big that they end up developing heart and leg problems, and they can't breed well. So to fight this, these companies restrict their food intake with these new nose bones. And through our investigation, Tyson actually became so worried about that public outcry that they ended up stopping using the nose bones before we even released the footage to the public. I mean, we showed the footage to them first, and they just immediately said they weren't going to use those anymore. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do with that footage once we get it.
Do you only go into farms in your area, or is it all across North America?
We are just a national organization, so we'll go all around the country. So I myself have worked in a chicken slaughter place in North Carolina. I was in a pig slaughter facility in Minnesota, and a lamb slaughter place in Northern California. So we pretty much go wherever we have to, wherever there's animal agriculture.
Yeah, you don't want to be too specific, because when those big corporations listen to this interview, they might get a tip of where their investigators might be, right? You can't give it all away. I
definitely wouldn't say where we're,
Yeah, exactly.
where we're sending people.
Let's turn this positive for a little bit. What are some of your biggest successes in your work?
Well, the Tyson one's huge.
Right, yeah.
Tyson was big, yeah. That wasn't me personally, but that was another COK investigator. So that was huge, just for the organization as a whole. For me personally, I mean, I think I've definitely done some like really interesting and well-timed investigations, I guess I could say. So when I was in the North Carolina chicken slaughter place, right, that was right before an ag-gag law was passed in that state. So that raised a lot of awareness of, this sort of things that these companies are trying to hide by lobbying for those ag-gag laws.
Sorry to interrupt, but before you go on, if anyone's listening that doesn't know what the ag-gag laws are, what does that mean exactly?
Right. Sorry. Yeah, the ag-gag laws, they're basically dangerous legislation that would basically make it illegal for us to perform these sorts of investigations, right? And it's not just like undercover, animal protection investigations that these ag-gag laws can stop. It's also people, just normal whistleblowers trying to expose worker abuse or environmental impacts or food safety issues, things like that. These ag-gag laws would stop all of those. These laws actually have some pretty serious First Amendment implications, so it's kind of unsurprising that recently a few of them have been found to be unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's crazy that not only is it happening, but they're trying to keep it happening.
Right.
Keep the exposure of it. And as teachers, we're under the microscope, as all these other workers all over the world were held to certain standards, right? Or certain companies are held to certain standards, yet the food that people are putting in their mouths to feed their bodies, to feed their children, they're like, it's like karma, that the feeling that the animals have, the way that they're treated affects the food, and I really do believe that it affects the food and it affects the people who are eating it. And I mean, maybe that's a little woo, and that's okay if people think that that's woo, but I really do think that if we're going to be eating food, no matter what that food is, we should be doing the very best that we can as individuals and a society, just to make sure that it is of the highest standard and best quality.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, these companies, right, they're actively lobbying for these ag-gag laws. I mean, they really have this huge vested interest in keeping the public in the dark about, even if it's, just their standard practices. They really don't want people to know how, their food is prepared.
So the information that you find, it gets put out into the media. You make these small videos with it. It gets published in the magazine. Is there anything else that you do with them?
I mean, I think media coverage is obviously like a big part of it. So we do try and get our stories published by major news organizations. So my lamb slaughterhouse one is at Superior Farms. That was covered by the New York Times.
Awesome.
My quality pork processors investigation, that was in, I think that had a story in Washington Post, and I think Times as well. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it's really just that exposure, and then whatever legal actions we can take. Since we do get a fair few convictions from our investigations, I think the Tyson one, as well as dairy one we did recently, had some animal cruelty convictions for them, which is really great for us.
So if people listening want to learn how they could make more of a difference in this part of the world, because this is very different for a lot of people listening, and I know you mentioned a few of these things before, but what would you suggest that they can do, whether it's locally or online? Is there something that they could do to really make a difference here?
I think for people, I mean, they can always, just help out in their own ways, helping, the animal protection organizations, donating, even if it's just, their time, passing out literature and stuff like that. On our website, cok.net, we have free vegan literature that people can order to help pass out. And then, we have a whole bunch of different ways people can get involved and support at least, what we do. We also have our other website, tryveg.com. You can get, recipes from there, vegan product tips and stuff like that they can share with people. I think as long as we can spread the message, I think that's really what's going to help, at least in the long run, I think.
I wanted to ask if you think the quality of cleanliness or the quality of tools or the way that the animals are killed is affecting the actual safety of the meat. And if you think that people in the public are dying or getting sick unnecessarily because certain standards are not being kept up.
I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in meat quality or anything, but I think logically, animals raised on factory farms that, spend their entire lives in cramped, filthy conditions, and they're given hormones and antibiotics. I really think that those shouldn't be food for people. And I mean, in terms of food safety, I've seen companies, personally, I've seen these companies do things like skip running their products under the metal detectors in the interest of time, so they can't tell if things like metal shavings or jewelry have gotten into the meat during the production process. I've seen them change the use or freeze by date labels on products so they can sell older meat to consumers. And other investigations have seen things like sick downer cows being put into the food supply that could make people sick. So I think that this kind of corner cutting really does have tangible impacts on the meat that ends up in stores. Just last week it was announced that I think 38,000 pounds of turkey had been recalled after a retailer noticed metal shavings in a package of ground turkey.
Just in time for Canadian Thanksgiving. And I've heard stories of the dates, Best Buy dates being changed.
Right.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your investigation into the pork slaughter facilities.
Right. So I did an investigation at Quality Pork Processors, which is a Minnesota slaughter plant, which exclusively supplies to Hormel. And actually, this plant operates under HIMP, which is the USDA's high-speed slaughter pilot program. QPP is actually one of the fastest slaughter plants in the nation. They kill about 1,300 pigs every hour. And this program, it not only lets this plant increase those line speeds, it also largely places the responsibility of food safety inspections into the hands of the actual slaughter plant employees themselves instead of the usual USDA inspectors, right? So it reduces the presence of those government personnel, which means that a lot of problems can go unnoticed, like workers taking inhumane shortcuts to keep up with those line speeds. So there, I documented people hitting the pigs in the face with rattle paddles. They would electrically prod them multiple times in the face. They would drag the pigs around with a big metal hook without checking to see if they were insensible first. Things like that. Push downer hogs out of the way to save time. Just anything they could do to help keep those line speeds up.
And so there's no way to stop any of that. The government's pushing it. They're allowing it basically, no?
The government will probably try to expand that plan. So us as an organization, we're really trying to get the public, to rally around sort of stopping the expansion of this program. We're not really sure, when they will actually do it or not, but we just want people to know that it's something that could be happening in the near future, and it's something that very likely could be affecting the welfare of all of these animals that are being slaughtered every day.
So we talked all about factory farming. Is there any impact when it comes to free range or grass-fed or those kind of animals? Is it any different, really?
Even for those animals, no matter how small the farm is, for the most part, they're going to go to the same slaughter facilities as animals that grow up on factory farms. So in terms of what I've personally seen, it's going to be the exact same for them, unfortunately. Plus, I don't really think you can feed everyone if, everyone wanted to eat meat. If it was all, grass-fed or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, free range. I don't think there's the space for it.
This is all crazy stuff, Scott. Thank you so much for sharing it. I think that the work that you did and that you continue to do with COK is so important. And it's really a matter of society really opening their eyes, opening their ears, and really understanding how the food's getting on their plate which I know people don't want to know. I mean, we're talking about animal welfare here, and animals are just a part of this planet as humans are. And sometimes we need to remember that, and sometimes we need to learn that. So I just want to thank you for sharing your story, your background, your work with all of our listeners and with us. If people listening want to reach out and connect with you, where would be the best place for them to find you?
Honestly, just on our website, cok.net, you can look at our staff page, and my email is actually on there. So, if you guys want to ask me any questions, if you're curious about anything, go ahead and shoot me an email on there.
Cool. So we'll link to that in our show notes. I'm also going to put links to those videos that we talked about earlier. And if you're going to watch them, just remember that they're graphic videos and it's pretty tough to watch.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast listening platforms. We appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it ensures other people will find us too. Thanks to our patrons. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference. Connect and follow us on Instagram and Twitter @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at www.planttrainers.com for awesome plant-based recipes and a list of our services. Email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so we can answer them on our upcoming Facebook Lives. We hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time, and have a healthy day.